Sharp, fast, and compact, the Fuji 33mm f1.4 promises it all. But does it live up to the hype? In this video, I'll share my real-world experiences with this lens, including photo samples from both my personal and professional work, and why, surprisingly, it hasn't become my go-to lens as much as I thought it would. Now, when it comes to build quality, the Fuji 33mm f1.4 is as solid as they come. The all-metal construction feels incredibly premium, and it's fully weather-sealed to handle tough conditions. I've had this lens out in the rain, sleet, and snow a handful of times with absolutely no issues whatsoever. Now, the lens features a 58mm filter thread, and the manual focus ring is wonderfully smooth. It's perfect for precise adjustments, though admittedly I shoot autofocus almost exclusively due to the thin depth of field that I get on this lens. The aperture ring is beautifully indexed, and the clicks feel just right. It has the perfect amount of resistance to prevent accidental changes by bumping it, like you get on some lower-end Fuji lenses. And there's also an aperture ring lock, like all of the new LM lenses, to keep the aperture ring locked into the A setting if you prefer automatic control. Like other Fuji lenses with a linear motor, you can feel and sometimes hear the elements shifting when you handle the lens with the camera powered off. Once you power it on, those elements stop floating around in the lens and that goes away. This is completely normal, it doesn't affect performance, but it is something to be aware of. The lens also does have some weight to it, which adds to the premium feel, but it's not too heavy. After extended use, my copy of this lens still shows no wear on the finish, it's holding up excellent, and it's built like a tank. I do have one gripe though, and it's the lens hood. The lens hood on this lens is big. It's great for protecting the front element from light and weather, but sometimes it's a little awkward for getting the camera in and out of the bag. It tends to catch on the edges of the bag as it goes in and out. The OEM lens hood is made of plastic, and while mine is holding up well aside from a few scuffs, I can't say I love the way it looks. It's just a little awkwardly large, almost as big as the lens. This annoyed me for quite a while, and I was always aware of aftermarket lens hoods, but I just never pulled the trigger until recently. A few weeks ago, JJC Photo commented on one of my videos just to say the video was great. And I'd already been eyeing some of their lens hoods, including the one for the 33mm, so I commented back to see if they'd be interested in collaborating to send me a lens hood to review, and a few days later I had this lens hood at my door. It's been living on my 33mm f1.4 ever since, and honestly I've come to love this lens hood, and here's why. This lens hood is made of metal, unlike the cheap plastic of the OEM hood, and it features a square design with beveled edges. That makes it easier to slide in and out of the camera bag without snagging, and it's just not as bulky as the OEM hood. And now, unlike other aftermarket hoods that I tried, especially those for my X105 when I had it, this doesn't rely on set screws that tend to misalign and let the lens hood twist around. It snaps on just the same as the OEM lens hood, and once it's on, it clicks firmly into place, and it's never come loose or fall off once. I have to say I'm a huge fan of this. So far, this lens hood has been a fantastic upgrade, and even if I'd had to purchase it with my own money, I'd be perfectly content with it, because it's not that expensive. My OEM lens hood is now just collecting dust in my drawer, and I expect it to stay there. If you're interested in picking up one of these JJC lens hood, I have added a link in the description, and just for full transparency, JJC did send me this lens hood free in exchange for featuring it in a review, but I'd already been planning to buy one, and so that's a win. Now, moving on, let's talk about how this lens balances on different Fuji bodies. On the X-T3 sized cameras, this lens feels just perfect. It's just the right size and weight for handling on that kind of a camera. Unfortunately, I can't show that to you anymore because I recently sold my beloved X-T3. More on that in an upcoming video. There's some moves going on with my equipment lineup. On my X-H2, this lens balances well, and you kind of forget it's there. Arguably, it's a little bit on the small side for such a big body, but that's not a deal breaker. It just kind of looks and feels a little bit awkward. I prefer my lenses to kind of match the size of the camera a little better, just for balance. As for the 33mm on my XM5, as you can see here, it's a little bit big on this camera, but it has become my go-to everyday carry lens on the XM5. It performs great on this camera. It's not too awkward to hold, especially with the hand grip and the thumb grip I have on the body, but it definitely is a little bit bigger than I would like, and I do think the 35mm f2 would feel way more natural on this body, and I likely will pick up a 35mm f2 for this body soon, and just reserve the 1.4 33mm for use on my professional work on my X-H2. Now, overall, when compared to other modern 50mm equivalent lenses from other systems, the 33mm is actually pretty impressively competitive in size and weight, but it is an APS-C lens, so you would expect that. Overall, when compared to other modern 50mm equivalent lenses from other systems, this lens is impressively competitive in size and weight. That being said, among Fuji's compact primes, it is one of the larger ones. It's almost exactly comparable in size to the 18mm f1.4, as you can see here. And in my lineup, it's just slightly larger than my Sigma 56mm, but it's noticeably smaller than my 56mm f1.2 Fuji lens, my 10-24, my 55-200, or my Tamron 17-70. You can see it is a reasonably sized lens if you compare it to zooms, but compared to most of Fuji's prime lineup, it is a little bit on the large side. Moving on to image quality, I've put together a selection of sample images taken with this lens in a variety of scenarios. Now, some of these are from my personal projects, and others are from my professional wedding and portrait photography. Overall, I've got to say I'm thrilled with the results that come out of this lens. It's easily one of the sharpest, if not the sharpest lenses in my kit, rivaling my 56mm 1.2 WR. The bokeh that this lens renders is beautiful, and the background separation is outstanding for an APS-C lens, especially when you get close to your subject and have them far away from the background, but that's true of any lens. Lens flare is pleasing and well controlled when shooting into a backlit subject or directly into the sun, and I haven't had any real issues with chromatic aberration, so most of the common issues with a fast aperture prime like this are well controlled. Now, go ahead and enjoy some sample images. I'll be back in just a moment to keep talking about this lens. Now, moving on to autofocus, admittedly, I'm not a sports or action photographer, nor is that what a 33mm prime like this is designed for. But I have been pretty impressed with the autofocus speed and accuracy of the linear motor focusing system on this lens. It rarely misses focus, and when it does, I can almost always trace it to user error from my big dumb self. The harshest test that I've put it through as far as moving subjects was going for a hike and photographing some erratically moving dogs using the XM5, so this setup right here. It performed very well, as you can see in these images, and I got a lot of sharp keepers. Now, it didn't have a 100% hit rate, but virtually no f1.4 prime lens shot wide open with a fast-moving subject is going to be perfect, even on better brands like Sony or Canon, where their autofocus is more refined. Now, I'm not going to perform a scientific autofocus test because, frankly, I find them boring and pointless. I like to shoot in the real world and see how my lenses perform in those situations. And for my use case as a wedding and portrait photographer, and for everyday photography of my daily life, I find that this lens focuses extremely well, and I really don't have any complaints. It focuses well in low-light scenarios on my X-H2 at weddings and other low-light events, and I'm perfectly happy with its performance for both photo and video autofocus. So who is the Fuji 33mm best for? In my opinion, this lens is best for anyone who wants the absolute best 50mm equivalent prime lens on a Fuji X camera body. If you're a working professional or a serious hobbyist who values top-tier image quality, fast autofocus, and weather sealing, and you're willing to invest a little bit of money in your gear to get it, then I think this lens is a no-brainer. Personally, it lives in my kit alongside my 18mm f1.4 and 56mm f1.2 as my primary wedding day trio. I shoot 90% of a wedding day on those three lenses. Now, that being said, not everyone needs this level of performance. If you're looking to save some money and can live without weather sealing or cutting edge sharpness, the classic 35mm f1.4 is still a fantastic budget-friendly option. If portability is your priority, you may want to look at the compact and budget-friendly 35mm f.2, I wish it was f.2. It is in fact a 35mm f2, and that lens is really worth considering, especially if you shoot on a smaller body like the XM5 and want to keep your kit small. Now, unfortunately for me, this is where I've got to give you a little bit of bad news. Personally, I haven't really meshed with this 33mm f1.4 the way that I thought I would. I honestly thought this might become one of the main lenses on my wedding day kit. And I know I said it is one of the main three, but it's really the bottom of those three. I use the 18 and 56 way more often. Now, that's honestly just because the 56mm lens is one of my favorite lenses of all time. And I prefer to use that for portrait sessions and absolutely as much of the wedding day as I possibly can. And if I'm doing that, then it really makes sense to have the 18mm on my other body because the 33 is just too similar of a focal length to the 56. And the result of that is that the 33mm pretty much stays in my bag unless I get into a situation where the 56mm is too tight and I'm forced to switch to the 33. And so I use this lens to bail me out when I'm shooting, getting ready in a tight space or something like that, but it's not my primary go-to lens on a wedding day. Now, admittedly, this says more about my personal focal length preferences than it does about the lens itself, because this lens does put out incredible images whenever I give it a chance and put it to use. I just tend to prefer the 85mm equivalent focal length from the 56 over the 50mm equivalent that comes from the 33 on a crop sensor. Ultimately, the Fuji 33mm f1.4 is a lens that's built for those who demand uncompromising image quality in their lenses. Now, if that sounds like you, then you definitely won't be disappointed by this lens, but I would caution you to make sure that it's actually the focal length that you want to invest your money into, because if, like me, you prefer something longer or wider, then you just might not get the use out of it that you thought you would. Now, if you're interested in purchasing this lens or the JJC lens hood that I mentioned earlier, please check out the affiliate links in the description below to help support this channel without costing you anything extra. I recently reviewed the 56mm 1.2 WR, and I'll also be releasing a video of the 18mm 1.4 in the near future. Now, please make sure you check out my other videos and subscribe to the channel to catch future ones.